So what I'll be doing in this lecture is I will try to probe in a slightly provocative manner the question as to whether Nietzsche, after all, was maybe a Christian, a closet Christian. We know that officially he did not present himself as a Christian, but maybe if we read between the lines and if we revisit certain textual passages by him which have been neglected or not read in the right light, we might after all come to realize that he had a much more favorable view of Christianity, number one, and number two, that he was in fact paying tribute to Christianity. His own thinking would not have been possible without Christianity. And then thirdly, maybe also, that there are structural similarities between his thinking and Christian theology. Nietzsche mounted some very violent attacks against Christianity. While Christianity is hardly mentioned in the book we discuss in this course, The Birth of Tragedy, in an essay called An Attempt at Self-Criticism, which he wrote much later in 1886, he explained this silence retrospectively as cautious and hostile, as though it were a first move against a purely moral interpretation of existence. You have this essay in your Penguin edition of The Birth of Tragedy. This moral interpretation betrays, with its absolute claims, a deep hostility to life. So he thought that Christianity is deeply hostile to life. Contrasting with Nietzsche's own early artist's metaphysics, as he puts it in this short essay. For if life is art, providing the mere appearance of salvation, then morality itself is mere appearance, delusion, error, interpretation, adjustment, art. And the Christian teachings, which are and want to be only moral, I'm quoting here from the essay, expel art, reject art, all art into the sphere of lies. So that's why he disliked Christianity already in his early work, because he thought that really life is art. Christianity rejects art and therefore it rejects life. It is life-denying. As Nietzsche put it in this attempt at self-criticism, since its beginning, Christianity has always been deeply and essentially life's utter disgust and aversion for life, which merely disguised itself as the belief in a different and better life, the transcendent life, the other world. Its hatred towards the world, its curse against the passions, its fear of beauty and sensuality, another world, other world, invented to better vilify this world, basically a longing for nothingness, for the end. All this, as well as the unswerving Christian determination to accept only moral values, always seems to me to be the most dangerous and most uncanny of all possible forms of a will for the fall, or at least a sign of deep disease, weariness, surliness, exhaustion, impoverishment of life. Because as far as morality is concerned, especially Christian morality, that is unconditional morality, life must always be in the wrong, since life is, in its essence, something immoral. Life eventually has to be felt as undesirable, as unworthy in itself, according to Christianity, or rather to Nietzsche's version of Christianity. As unworthy in itself. Might morality not be a will to the denial of life, a secret instinct of destruction, a principle of decay, of diminution, of denial, a beginning of the end? One can add many more passages of this kind. For example, Nietzsche described Christianity as the greatest misfortune of mankind in the twilight of the idols, and also in the Antichrist as its greatest curse and blemish, as a crime against life. Nietzsche saw Christian morality as a capital crime against life. And in his Ecce Homo, he wrote, and he saw his own book Ecce Homo as a ruthless attack against the crucified, against Jesus Christ. These points he repeats time and again throughout his work, culminating in the Polemics of the Antichrist, published in 1888, so a very late work. A very useful summary of his mature position of Christianity, however, is found in this attempt at self-criticism. I don't think that he adds many substantial points concerning his position on Christianity beyond this passage here. There are a few more points. I will add them in a second as well. So, therefore, I will try to now distill Nietzsche's main points or take on Christianity in the following way. I will use 9 propositions for that. Proposition 1. Life is essentially immoral. That means, I sometimes will explain what that means. Life is an immanent phenomenon. It involves affects, beauty, and sensuality. Second proposition. Morality is the will to negate life. That means it involves an instinct of destruction and downfall, a principle of decadence and calumny. Third, Christianity allows only for moral values. Fourth, therefore, Christianity is life-negating. That is, it is driven by a hatred of the world, a desire for nothingness, and has invented the afterworld, a mere fiction, to enhance its life-negating hatred. Fifth proposition. All salvation is fantasy, and morality is mere appearance, error, interpretation, art. So this is where my summary of the key points of this passage I have just quoted from the short essay ends, but I will end now a few more propositions. To this we can then add Nietzsche's view about truth, falsehood, and belief, formulated in the same year as the short essay, namely in Beyond Good and Evil in 1886, section 24. But also, he mentioned these points in other previous essays, for instance, in the essay on Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense. So, proposition 6, oh, sorry, I forgot proposition 5, you have it here. Proposition 6, truths are linguistic illusions. That is, as illusions, truths are dead metaphors, whose fictional status we have forgotten. So truths are just metaphors, fictions, but we are not aware of the fact that they are fictions any longer. Our belief in truth is based on deception and error. Truth, like reason, thought, soul, will, are useless fictions. All these are useless fictions. Furthermore, in the Antichrist, we are told, proposition 7, believing, that is, having faith, is not wanting to know the truth. To be a believer is to not want to know the truth. Therefore, the pietist, the Protestant and Catholic priest are all fake human beings. Because they are sick, not wanting to give truth its due. Christianity denies reality, sees reality as a deadly enemy, and therefore sees truth as a deadly enemy. Also in the Antichrist, Nietzsche argues that, proposition 8, the falsest judgments are the most indispensable ones. The falsest judgments are the most indispensable ones. In other words, humans cannot live without accepting the validity of logical fictions, without measuring reality against the invented world of the unconditioned, the absolute, without the constant falsification of the world. We cannot live without constantly falsifying the world, a very popular thesis with postmodern philosophers. Finally, we find Nietzsche also claiming, for example, in a fragment from 1887, that, proposition 9, the last one, truth is holding something to be true. In other words, that's a logical analysis. Truth means the same, is identical with holding something to be true. Or instead, holding something to be true is what matters, not being true. Being true is secondary to holding something to be true. We shouldn't care too much about really whether we are right or not, whether we know the truth or not. What matters is that we hold beliefs. Trusting reason, the categories, logic, proves merely their usefulness for life, doesn't prove their truth. Faith, absence of doubt, is the presupposition for the institution of judging, indeed the presupposition for all life. Good, so these were my 9 propositions, or Nietzsche's 9 propositions. Now I shall proceed to discussing them, unless you have a question, comment to make. It is not difficult to show, I believe, that propositions 1 to 9 are mutually incompatible, and that Nietzsche does not quite manage to refute Christianity in the way he intends to. For example, take propositions 6 and 7. They are obviously incompatible. Nietzsche cannot both claim that truth is an illusion and denounce Christianity for eschewing truth, for avoiding truth, for denying reality. To claim error, we need truth. To claim one is mistaken or your opponent is mistaken, you need to have the position of truth, the vantage point of truth. And to point at appearances is to presuppose reality. That is good in mind, well in mind. To point at appearances, you need to presuppose reality, otherwise you cannot say that X, Y, Z is a mere appearance. The point also applies to Kant. Proposition 6 is in fact not even internally consistent, for it claims as a truth that truth is an illusion. That's the cheap logical move one can always make, that the skeptic here contradicts himself. In addition, proposition 8 entails that there are truth judgments. Why? Because if a judgment is false, its negation will be true. That's just a very basic rule of logic, of elementary logic. If you have a false judgment, you just have to negate it and then you get a true judgment. For standard judgments, this is certainly a correct principle of logic. The inconsistency increases if we consider the other propositions. First, propositions 1 to 5 all claim truths, make truth claims, which by proposition 6 must be illusions. Second, I have here 6 points. Second, if Christianity is based on a fiction, proposition 4, it is, like all attempts at salvation, a mere fantasy, itself belonging to the domain of appearance and art, proposition 5. But this is, of course, consistent with the historical record, the historical knowledge we have about Christianity. Christianity can indeed be described as having created the most impressive and diverse artwork, at the minimum. If we don't want to engage with the theological content of Christianity, at the very minimum we have to accept that it has created some fantastic works of culture. Bear in mind the cathedrals that it has created, the church music, the sects, the confessions, its inventive, highly speculative theology from Augustine to Aquinas, from Melanchthon, the right hand of Martin Luther, to Suarez, a Spanish neo-scholastic philosopher, from Karl Barth, a 20th century major theologian, to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, another German theologian of the 20th century. So, therefore, one could say that Christianity's adherents appear to derive temporal satisfaction, hence immanent salvation, from their fictions, if this is how we want to take them. So that will then meet Nietzsche's requirement for art, or definition for art, and therefore one may wonder why we should be describing Christianity as life-denying. Thirdly, since life is immoral, proposition 1, and Christianity is essentially morality, proposition 3, its judgments are the most false, most life-denying, proposition 2, and thus the most indispensable, proposition 8, the most life-affirming ones. Fourth, the pragmatist claim in proposition 9 is self-contradictory and inconsistent, at least with propositions 5 to 7. You can jot this down and work this out at home. I can only give you here some hints. Concerning the first claim in proposition 9, so truth is holding something to be true. I only wrote actually the first claim there. Given semantic compositionality, we cannot explain a simple term by means of a more complex term. Okay, is that clear to everybody? If you take proposition 9 to be offering a logical analysis of the concept of truth, in other words, telling us what truth amounts to, then you cannot really explain the concept of truth, right, by means of such a complex phrase. Especially not if in that larger phrase you have the very concept that you are trying to explain occurring again, and you have it. Yeah? Truth is holding something to be true. Here is truth twice occurring, therefore the whole logical analysis, alleged logical analysis, is circular. For the same reason, if holding something to be true is what matters, then something being true also matters from a conceptual point of view, as the former concept, holding something to be true, contains the latter concept, something being true, and hence it cannot be right to say, to define truth as holding something to be true. That's just a logical blunder, a big one. We would not even be able to make sense of or learn what it is to hold something to be true without also understanding what it is for something to be true. Something being true is the more basic and elementary concept upon which is built the concept of holding something to be true, and then the concept of something appearing to be true. Truth is surely a valuable matter, neither useless nor a fiction. Nietzsche is wrong here. Fifthly, dead metaphors are not metaphors. Dead metaphor is a metaphor for expressions which used to be metaphors. Nietzsche appears to believe that all language is systematically distorting and deceptive, another popular postmodern claim. But distorting what? And deceptive with respect to what? And six, my final negative point. If humans cannot live without logical fictions, the unconditioned, mentioned in proposition 8, and faith, proposition 9, what is there to object to Christianity or indeed any religion? So I've tried here to poke holes into Nietzsche's attack on Christianity, at least the prima facie attack on Christianity. Thus, Nietzsche writes, again in this essay, An Attempt at Self-Criticism, I can, by the way, add more such objections. So I only derived altogether 6 additional contradictions, but I think one could really add many more. So, in any case, Nietzsche writes in An Attempt at Self-Criticism that Christianity has always been, deeply and essentially, life's utter disgust and aversion of life. We have just seen that he says that. To present Christianity in this matter is not to present it as a body of true or false doctrines, but as a fundamental attitude to life. Is it a wrong attitude, we may ask? Who is to decide? After all, as Nietzsche presents it, it is just another phenomenon of life. Christianity is just another phenomenon of life. Namely, it's the phenomenon of life's aversion against life. But that's still a phenomenon of life. To reject it is to assume a position external to life. To reject Christianity is to assume a position external to life, a life-denying position which accepts only certain phenomena of life and rejects other phenomena of life. But an all-encompassing affirmation of life, as Nietzsche claims he is offering us, cannot do this. It must claim neutrality towards all manifestations of life. All manifestations of life are on a par and they all have to be affirmed. If there is one manifestation of life which is life negating, let's say it's Christianity, it doesn't matter. So what? It's still part of life and it must be affirmed. Okay, so that would then mean that Nietzsche, in fact, must present religion as something outside the business of truth and falsehood, right? If he is to claim neutrality towards all manifestations of life, he is then committed to the position that all religion must be outside of the business of truth and falsehood. In Human All Too Human, Nietzsche argues exactly this. He writes, indeed, religion and real science are neither relatives nor friends, nor even enemies. They live on different stars. Very beautiful metaphor, unquote. But if the distance between science and religion is so great that it excludes even enmity, opposition, what is there to object to religion and on what grounds? Nietzsche appears to be involved here in a contradiction. He rejects something which is not in the business of truth, religion, because it does not comply with something which is in the business of truth, namely science. But you might say he's comparing here apples with oranges. In addition, if Christianity's propositions are not in the business of truth, because they express an attitude to life, then Nietzsche's own propositions, those by means of which he rejects Christianity in favor of his own moral pronouncements, cannot be in the business of truth either. So his position is collapsing into the position that he is attacking. This would make Christianity and Nietzsche's propositions, own sentences, own assertions, logically entirely comparable. But then it would also undermine his criticism of Christianity because his own propositions would not be in the business of truth and falsehood any longer. Neither Christian propositions nor negations of Christian propositions, and I take Nietzsche's propositions to be negations of Christian propositions, are in the business of truth. Of course, the reply to this is that Nietzsche emphatically rejects Christianity at a material level, at the level of doctrinal content. His polemical attacks against Christianity would otherwise not make sense. They involve strong logical and normative claims. For instance, he classifies the emergence of the conception of sin, the Christian conception of sin, as an error of reason. That's in Human All Too Human. And he distinguishes, as is well known, between two types of morality, master morality and slave morality. The former being constituted by positive predicates such as good, noble, mighty, beautiful, happy, etc., while the latter, slave morality, is constituted by negative predicates such as foolish, weak, base, coward, anxious, petty. Equally, in Ecce Homo, he describes his doctrine of the affirmation of life as the highest and deepest insight, confirmed by truth and science. Hence, it cannot be the case that his own propositions are not in the business of truth and falsehood. This means then that Nietzsche is firmly committed to there being existential ethical truths and a fundamental reality of life. Like Schopenhauer, you may say. The crux of his attack against Christianity is then that it is centered on propositions 1, 2, and 3. I'll show you again those. Life is essentially immoral, morality is the will to negate life, and Christianity allows only for moral values. He is affirming the morality of life, the life-negating character of morality, and thus of Christianity. Moreover, Nietzsche also claims that the Christian and generally religious articles of faith are false and unfounded. For instance, he writes in Human All Too Human, a religion has never contained the truth, whether directly or indirectly, whether as a dogma or as a metaphor. He writes this, by the way, in italics. It's very interesting. So what does his position really then amounts to if we take just this one assertion? Is it that religion is in the business of truth, but it has only made false assertions so far? And does it follow from that to be religious is to make always false assertions? Or can there also be true assertions by negation of the false religious assertions? Or is it rather that religion is not in the business of truth and falsehood at all? You cannot have both positions at the same time, and depending on which position you accept as being Nietzsche's attack against religion, his own attack needs to be reinterpreted. He wrote in Human All Too Human also, when on Sunday morning we hear the droning of the old bells, we wonder, is this possible? This for a Jew crucified 2 millennia ago, who claimed to be God's son. The proof of this is wanting. So clearly he's saying Christianity's assertions are simply false, wrong, unacceptably, so scandalously false. Well, this then strongly suggests that he considers the Christian dogmas to be false and unfounded. Maybe we can at least agree on this position. Paradoxically, however, accepting this interpretation also has the result of making Christianity and Nietzsche's ethical views again comparable with one another. They turn out to be existential ethical positions at the same logical level. The Christian ones being false and to be rejected, according to Nietzsche. The latter ones, Nietzsche's own, being true and to be accepted. Nietzsche is quite explicit about this in his Genealogy of Morals, where he contrasts master morality's free, self-certain, spontaneous, creative impulses with slave morality's reversal of the value-setting gaze. He calls it in German Umkehrung des wertesetzenden Blicks. I repeated, reversal of the value-setting gaze. Which is to say no to something external to my belief system, something which is presupposed, something against which slave morality needs to react, something it needs to resent in order to be. So Christianity belongs to slave morality because it is involved in this reversal of the value-setting gaze. It's always reactive. It has to presuppose, it needs to rely on something external, which is to be rejected, denied, in order to exist. Whereas supposedly, master morality is not like that. Master morality is purely affirmative from the beginning. It doesn't rely on anything external in order to justify its own existence. Also in Beyond Good and Evil, Christianity is described as the revaluation of all ancient values. You'll find this in section 46. This then brings both moralities, the Christian and the Nietzschean one, to the same level of comparison in two respects. First, if slave morality consists of the reversal of the value-setting gaze, then the value-setting gaze is presupposed by slave morality and shared with master morality. They both have this one thing in common, the so-called value-setting gaze. They are both involved in the business of values. Second, Nietzsche's own ethics is also based on a reversal, an Umkehrung, that's the German word. We will find here, therefore, entirely parallel formal structures. In conclusion, it is not very easy to make coherent sense of Nietzsche's rejection of Christianity at what I have taken to be the general, formal, partly logical level of analysis. At worst, Nietzsche's rejection of Christianity is self-contradictory. At best, it is comparable to Christianity. Hermeneutic charity dictates that we adopt the second position. So from now on, I will adopt the position, for the sake of charity, that Nietzsche's own views are at least comparable to those of Christianity, in the sense in which both positions, both frameworks are in the business of truth or falsehood and in the business of values, of ethics. From now on, for the rest of the lecture, I shall explore whether there is any material affinity between the two positions, Nietzsche's and Christianity's. My lecture will discuss various passages in which Nietzsche has positive things to say about Christianity, and then revisit the deeper affinities identified by Heidegger, Simmel, Jaspers, and Overbeck, so if time permits. Good. Do you have any questions so far? So the actual game is starting now. Yeah.
Sorry, what was the gaze called again?
The gaze setting. Sorry, what did you say? The value setting gaze?
The value setting gaze.
Yes, the value setting gaze. Exactly. Yeah. The fact that we cannot go through life as the creatures we are without setting, constructing, creating values all the time and seeing things from a value point of view, value-based point of view, good and bad, etc., yeah? Evaluative. So let's probe a bit deeper. I will now try to demonstrate that Nietzsche's attitude towards Christianity was more ambiguous than it meets the first eye, at first sight. Nietzsche's attitude to Christianity is, despite its many attacks, rather ambivalent. For he wrote some surprisingly positive things about Christianity as well. For example, he wrote to his friend Heinrich Köselitz, also known as Peter Gast, that Christianity is still and all the best piece of ideal life that I have really known. I have followed it since I was a child into many nooks, and I think that in my heart I have never been scornful against it. Hear, hear. That was written in the year 1881. And just 2 days later after this letter, he wrote to his fellow atheist Franz Overbeck, a lifetime-long friend, very important friend. I have never in my heart been scornful against Christianity and have since childhood made an inner effort for its ideals, though in the end, admittedly, the outcome was always a pure impossibility. He's almost regretting that he didn't manage to become a Christian. At times, Nietzsche acknowledges the positive psychological and cultural effects of Christianity. In Beyond Good and Evil, he writes, "The way in which reverence for the Bible has been maintained in Europe is perhaps the best cultivation and refinement of morals that Europe owes to Christianity. Such books of depth and of ultimate meaning need to be protected by an external tyranny of authority in order to secure the duration of millennia, which are necessary for their exhaustive interpretation. He's to some extent here justifying, Inquisition, or at least the church indices. You might know that in the Middle Ages and early modern period, actually no, it went all the way up to the 19th century, the Catholic Church, when it would encounter a publication it disliked, or an author it disliked, it would put the book or the author on an index, and you wouldn't be allowed to read the book unless you were yourself a clergyman, maybe very high up in the church's hierarchy. Much is achieved when the vast crowd, the plebs as it were, is conditioned to feel that some things are untouchable, unquote. Even Christian clerics, priests, are sometimes praised by Nietzsche, believe it or not. He writes, "Christianity has perhaps chiseled the finest specimen of human society of all time, the specimens of the higher and highest Catholic clergy." I'm not making this up, this is original Nietzsche. In such passages, Christianity appears as a means to an end, the civilization of the masses, the sophistication of inner life. Christianity is here seen as a necessary step on a ladder which can be thrown away once climbed upon. It is only logical that in a fragment not included in Ecce Homo, Nietzsche presents himself as an episode, a chapter, if, however, albeit the final one, of Christianity. He writes, "If I wage war against Christianity, then I'm entitled to this only because I have never experienced gloom or sadness from this direction. Conversely, the most estimable people I know were Christians without any falsehood in them. That which has the fatality of millennia, I am far from blaming on individuals. My own ancestors were Protestant clerics." You remember his father was a priest. Had they not given me a noble and pure sense, I would not know whence my right to a war against Christianity. My formula for that: the Antichrist is himself the necessary logic in the development of a true Christian. In me, Christianity overcomes itself. So that gives you some idea about the ambivalent attitude Nietzsche has towards Christianity. It's a very nice passage, not much known. You need to know the Nachlass, the posthumous writings of Nietzsche, to come across a passage like this. Nevertheless, I believe that Nietzsche's ambivalent attitude towards Christianity can be pushed even further. To see this, let us look on his treatment of Saint Paul, the founder of Christianity, in Nietzsche's book Dawn, or Daybreak, I think it's also translated as. So, Saint Paul, this is our friend, Saint Paul, a man probably historically the most influential human on the planet, I think, after Jesus. It's hard to say exactly, but without Saint Paul, Jesus would not have become the character that we know today. Saint Paul was the man who transformed Christianity from a relatively small sect into something of universal importance and significance. It is clear that a man, one of the most ambitious, pushy, superstitious, and devious men, this is how Nietzsche characterizes Saint Paul, cannot earn Nietzsche's full sympathies. Still, Saint Paul's drama is described in a rather engaging, almost sympathetic manner by Nietzsche. Saint Paul was a man obsessed with defending God's law. He was a Jew, so he was obsessed with being a good Jew. That means following the laws which had been dictated by God, the commandments of God. But he was tormented by the question of how this unattainable divine law can be followed. As a consequence, St. Paul, like Martin Luther much later, began to hate the law, began to hate God's commandments, until it struck him that this new prophet, Jesus, is the destroyer of the law, and that that he's the destroyer of the law, through whom moral despair is as if blown away, because morality is blown away, destroyed, that is fulfilled, right there on the cross. I have just quoted from an amazing passage by Nietzsche on St. Paul. After this passage, there follows a page-long description of St. Paul's conversion from Judaism, from the Jewish religion, to Christianity. And if you read this passage, I will offer you this passage. It is worth reading it together. If you read this passage, you will realize that it is so passionate, so full of fervor, really, that it has almost, religious qualities, one might say, or mystic qualities. So here it goes. The tremendous consequences of this idea, of this resolution, swirl before St. Paul's gaze. He is suddenly the happiest of men. The fate of the Jews, no, of all humanity, seems to him bound to this idea, this second of sudden illumination. He has the thought of all thoughts, the key of all keys, the light of all light. History will henceforth turn around him, because he is now the teacher of the destruction of the law. To perish away from evil, which is also to perish away from the law, that is to be incarnated, which is also to be in the law. That's supposed to be the dialectic of the conversion of St. Paul. Having become one with Christ, which also means having become with him the destroyer of the law, having perished with him, which is also having perished away from the law. Even if it was possible to still sin, to commit sinful acts, it would not be sinning against the law. I am outside of it. If I've now accepted the law again and submitted to it, I would make Christ a collaborator in sin, because the law was there to commit sin. It always drove sin forward. You cannot commit a sin, you cannot commit a crime unless there is a law with respect to which you are committing the crime, with respect to which you are violating the very law. And hence, if St. Paul believes that he has found a means to solve his obsession about how he can reach these unattainably strong ideals of God's commandments. And he thinks that Jesus Christ, by having incarnated himself, has brought God's laws into a person, into an actual human being, becoming one with Jesus Christ, whatever that means, of course, will therefore solve the problem. He doesn't have to look up the Old Testament any longer, as it were, and read up the Ten Commandments and then worry whether or not he has managed to attain them, achieve those commandments, meet them. Second part of the passage. God would never have decided on the death of Christ if, without it, the fulfillment of the law had been possible. Now, not only is all guilt paid off, but guilt itself has been destroyed. Now the law is dead. The flesh in which it resided is dead, or at least perpetually dying off, decaying all the same. Only a short time amidst the decay. This is the good fortune of the Christian. before he, having become one with Christ, is resurrected with Christ, partakes in the divine splendor, and becomes the Son of God, like Christ. This is the rapture of St. Paul on his mountaintop, and the invasive aggression of his soul. This is the first Christ, the inventor of Christianity. Okay, I think this passage deserves to be interpreted very carefully. If I hadn't told you that this is from Nietzsche, if I had started my lecture with this, you'd have thought you are in the wrong lecture here. You thought you are in a Sunday church mass, isn't it? I think there is an element of that. You can sense here he is so so much embedded in the and soaked up in the texture of Christian theology and tradition that it's for him very easy and straightforward to write texts like this. Yeah. This passage is supposed to be part of Nietzsche's refutation of Christianity, inasmuch as it reveals the psychological mechanism behind St. Paul's conversion, a typical move in Nietzschean dialectics. Right? He often does that when he wants to reject a view, instead of rejecting it on the truth or falsehood level, on the logical level, he's simply looking at what has driven this person to adopt this position. But we have already seen that this is a problematic move. However, I believe that the text is much more ambivalent. The tone itself is exuberant. The author is visibly excited by the facts he describes. Some parts of the text sound like a description of Nietzsche's own aspirations and morals project. Does he not himself aim to destroy the old moral order, revalue all values, the destruction of the law? Were the old moral order, the moral laws established by Christianity, not the main driving force of the self-torturing institution of sin? It always drove sin forward. Does Nietzsche not believe to have found a way to destroy our guilt-ridden morality? Guilt itself has been destroyed. Does he not intend to abolish shame and subordination? Every shame, every subordination, every barrier is removed, at least for those capable of master morality, and replace it with the irrepressible will to rule, will to power, the irrepressible will of imperiousness. These parallels take us beyond the merely formal parallels I have established in the lecture so far. The Dawn passage describes the liberation of an individual from the fundamental moral constraints of the past. Many of Nietzsche's own attacks on Christianity, especially his climax in the Antichrist, can be described in precisely those terms. And St. Paul is described here as the happiest man. Of course, he may be the happiest man for the wrong reason, at least from Nietzsche's point of view, deriving happiness from the divine glories which he, St. Paul, believes he is partaking in, when in fact, according to Nietzsche, these supposed divine glories are mere fictions. In any case, this axiological emotive phenomenology, so axiological means the doctrine of values, yeah? Which Nietzsche claims to discover in St. Paul, as well as its correlated life-affirming potential, is strikingly similar to Nietzsche's own case. As we know, in Nietzsche's late period, his polemic against Christianity reached a new intensity. This is most obvious in the Antichrist. Some passages in this book, however, are puzzling. For instance, the Jews are described as the strangest people in history, since they always chose being, sein, at all costs, an attitude which led to the falsification of nature. But for the uncompromising naturalist which Nietzsche claims to be, especially in the Antichrist, the distinction between being and nature which he introduces is perplexing. Either this distinction is in fact not valid, and nature is all there is, or it is a valid distinction, but then naturalism is not a valid doctrine. What is naturalism, roughly speaking? The idea that everything that exists can be described in terms of nature, of processes in nature, relations in nature, objects in nature, and so on and so forth. Especially, naturalism is often a doctrine presented with respect to the mind, to the character of the mind. For if the distinction is valid, we must admit something Nietzsche calls being, which goes beyond nature, can be an object of our choices, and from whose vantage point nature can be falsified, as apparently the people of Israel did. Similarly, the story of Israel is presented as a primary example of the denaturalization of natural values. Initially, I'm quoting, Israel too stood in the right relation to all things, that is, in the natural relation. It was standing in the good, healthy relation to reality. Its God, Yahweh, was the expression of its life as a people, the expression of joy of oneself, hope in oneself. As a consequence, Yahweh was a God of justice. But eventually, this whole story unraveled. The causal relation was reversed by so-called clerical agitators, as Nietzsche calls them, nasty priests. And happiness became the reward for obeying, and unhappiness the punishment for disobeying God. And all the natural relation to nature disappeared. This replaced the natural vitalistic causality with an unnatural or anti-natural causality, in German widernatürliche Kausalität. Again, this is now my critical comment, it seems to me that Nietzsche's argument verges here on inconsistency. We cannot make sense of an unnatural causality, especially not on Nietzsche's purely mechanistic view of man, lacking free will and belonging entirely to nature. An unnatural causality would at the same time belong to nature and contradict nature. Okay, I hope this objection makes sense. If you are a naturalist, your account of causality will have to be an account of relations as they happen all in nature. You do not believe that there can be any causal relations other than the ones happening in nature. But that's exactly what Nietzsche seems to be assuming here in his story of the decadence of the people of Israel, who moved from a very natural, healthy position towards the world to an unnatural one. Okay. Similar considerations apply to his own criticism of Christianity. So I just discussed his criticism of Judaism. Now let's look at his criticism of Christianity. Nevertheless, there is another side to the Antichrist, especially clear in sections 32 to 42, where Nietzsche develops an account of original Christianity as a childlike faith, a faith of undeveloped individuals, a childishness withdrawn into spirituality, as it were, which knows no struggle and division, no dogmas and self-assertion, but only a continuous life, liquid, unformable, streaming from within. This is all in the Antichrist. So he seems to have a twofold take on Christianity. He distinguishes between inner Christianity, about which he speaks in rather positive terms, and then external historical Christianity, of which he speaks in very negative terms. So the historical force that has come to shape European culture, that is very bad for him. But the inner core of Christianity, and there you will see in a second quotation to this end, seems to be something of which at least he is not dismissive. The way in which Nietzsche describes this inner faith is far from hostile. Indeed, it carries a certain gentleness towards the subject. Here you are. He's here describing Jesus' own faith and life. Jesus' own faith and life. Such a belief does not come cross, does not scold, does not resist. It does not bring the sword. It does not even realize to what extent it could become a dividing force. It does not prove itself, either by miracles, or by reward or promise, or even by the gospel. It is at every moment its own miracle, its own reward, its own kingdom of God. Nor does this belief formulate itself. It lives. It resists formulations, in other words, formulations into dogmas, doctrines. One could, if applying the expression liberally, call Jesus a free spirit. All that is solid means nothing to him. The word kills, the dogma, the doctrine kills. All that is solid kills. The concept, the experience of life, as he alone knows it, resists any kind of word, formula, law, belief, dogma. Second part, Jesus only speaks of the innermost life, or truth, or light. All these are his word for the innermost, words for the innermost. Everything else, the whole of reality, all of nature, language itself, has for him but the value of a sign, a simile. He does not know culture even by hearsay. He has no need to battle against it. He does not negate it. The same with the state, the whole civil order and society, with work, with war. He never had a reason to negate the world. He never anticipated the ecclesiastic concept world, the clergy-like, church-based concept world. For negation is to him completely impossible. End of quote. Evidently, original Christianity is presented here as the overcoming of death, as the rejection of negation, as affirmation, as life in the emphatic sense. This has a strong affinity, I would claim, with Nietzsche's own, no less emphatic conception of affirmation, of life affirmation, described in Ecce Homo as the unreserved affirmation of suffering itself, of guilt itself, of all that is questionable and strange about existence itself. Unquote. Both Christianity and Nietzsche's ethics, therefore, offer a doctrine of salvation, a soteriology. Neither soteriology denies major realities of life, especially not pain, suffering, evil, but both overcome them by acceptance and affirmation, which leads to immediate happiness on earth, not in an afterlife. So he is presenting here Christianity as an immanent religion, religion of the current life, and Jesus himself as a prophet of the affirmation of immanent life. And Nietzsche dismisses here Jesus' own talk about an afterlife, and so he thinks these were not really important elements in Jesus' own ethics. So not in the afterlife, with the kingdom of heaven as a state of the heart, not a state of your future post-mortem existence, but a state of the heart, almost like in Buddhism, you might say. This affirmation amounts in both cases to the rejection of death and the attainment of a sort of bliss in the moment, a special moment, namely the moment in which the present, the particular, coincides with the ideal, the infinite. In Christianity's case, this is God, heaven, eternity. Sin, any relation distancing God from man, is removed. This is precisely the good news, Nietzsche writes. Bliss is not promised or subject to conditions. It is the only reality. I've just quoted from Nietzsche. The same coincidence of particular and ideal is found in Nietzsche's own ethics as well. As a fragment from 1886 puts it, I quote, "If we say yes to even one moment, we have not only said yes to ourselves, but to all existence. So we have to say yes. If we say yes to one moment, we say yes to all eternity. I'll come back to this passage. It's longer than this. In both cases, then, the doctrine of salvation is not based on a body of doctrines, on conditions, but on something more immediate, something instinctual. In Christianity's case, this is simply the uncompromising realization of the ethics of universal love. Jesus, this great symbolist, as Nietzsche calls him, lived and died as he preached, exactly as he preached. In Nietzsche's case, the practice of salvation is less clear, I would argue, but may well be something more contemplative, a poetical or ecstatic state attained after reaching the affirmative yes state. So I'm saying that Christianity in some sense is the better buy, because you read the Bible and you kind of get the idea of how salvation is possible. It's less clear in Nietzsche, I would claim. How are we then to reconcile the seemingly conflicting things Nietzsche says about Christianity? On the one hand, calling it a blemish of mankind, right? Utter disaster for mankind. On the other hand, look what he has said about St. Paul, what he says about Jesus, and so on. In order to solve this problem, we need to look at a few German philosophers of the 20th century, which I think have given very, very important arguments. They are not very well known in the Anglophone literature on Nietzsche. So what I'm telling you here is pretty much groundbreaking stuff. However, I don't have enough time to discuss all of them. So some of these philosophers include Heidegger, Jaspers. I couldn't find quickly a photo of Simmel, so there is no Georg Simmel here. And then, of course, especially Franz Overbeck again, Nietzsche's lifelong friend. Martin Heidegger gives us a first clue as to how we can reconcile Nietzsche's seeming contradictory remarks about Christianity. Heidegger writes, Nietzsche does not understand Christianity as the Christian life which once and for a short life existed prior to the composition of the gospel and the missionary propaganda of St. Paul. For Nietzsche, Christianity is the historical secular political phenomenon of the church and its claim to power within the formation of Western humanity and its modern culture. Christianity in this sense and the Christian life of the New Testament faith are not the same. A Christian life is not necessarily in need of Christianity. Therefore, a confrontation with Christianity is by no means an absolute battle against what is Christian. So this was just a clue offered by Heidegger. The distinction made here between original Christian life and Christianity as a historical phenomenon allows for the possibility that one may criticize Christianity while being informed by a Christian life and its value. And I would argue that's exactly Nietzsche's own predicament. I will now skip my discussion of Karl Jaspers and Georg Simmel's take on Nietzsche on Christianity. We simply do not have the time. And jump to the end of my lecture, where I am probing an even more radical idea, right? I'm not just saying that Nietzsche was, in his criticism of Christianity as a historical phenomenon, informed by the inner ethics of Christianity. Rather, I'm claiming that, in fact, his own value system is transcendent and therefore much more religious than it appears at first sight. Franz Overbeck, Nietzsche's friend, argued that key aspects of Nietzsche's ethics, especially the ideas of Zarathustra, the idea of the Superman, the distinction between slave and master morality, and the eternal recurrence are all mythological constructs, not from this world, as Overbeck wrote, figments of fantasy and dreams, mysteries. The slave-master distinction, for instance, is based, according to Overbeck, on a most forced historical construction, an empty phantasm, reminiscent of the idealisms of the German philosophers Nietzsche otherwise himself combated. As an empirical law, the eternal recurrence, Overbeck argued, has no evidence in human history and clashes in fact with Nietzsche's metaphysics of power, which implies the opposite, perpetual change. We can add here to Overbeck's argument, in fact, criticism of his friend Nietzsche, two more thoughts. First, there cannot be even any possible evidence for an eternal recurrence, since any piece of evidence in any cycle is merely evidence for something within the cycle. So he famously propounded this doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same, and people have been debating what exactly he meant by that. Is that supposed to be just a psychological attitude I take towards my own life, that I live every moment in such a way as if it will be recurring in all eternity again and again and again in a cycle that's supposed to somehow undermine my need for a transcendent world, for salvation? Or is it rather that this is meant literally as a proposal as to how the world works, how the universe works, that it eternally recurs again? If it's the second one, I am saying it's wrong, right? We cannot really make sense for it, given that Nietzsche is a naturalist, and that means he's an empiricist. For him, all knowledge has to be acquired by experience. You cannot have any experiential evidence for the eternal recurrence, because every putative evidence that the world will be recurring again and again will be only evidence within the current cycle of the world and nothing, and will not be pointing at anything outside of that cycle. So that's my first objection. Second, if the new ethics and life Nietzsche proposes are based on the insight of the eternal recurrence, then the very insight of the recurrence is also eternally recurring. But then there is nothing new in my insight into the eternal recurrence. It too has occurred before and will occur again. Why should this mark a tremendous moment, as Nietzsche puts it, overpowering and changing me? It might, quite to the contrary, have a debilitating effect on me, because I realized that even this moment has come before. This suggests that the eternal recurrence is either a phantasm, a fictional construct, or at best a mere regulative ideal or postulate, like Immanuel Kant's postulates. But then why not accept Immanuel Kant's ethical postulates? There are other phantasmagoric aspects of Nietzsche's ethics. In Dawn, Nietzsche takes issue with the inference life could not be bearable if there were no God. Hence, there must be a God, or an ethical importance to life. So that's supposed to be a proof, or sort of ethical proof of the existence of God. There must be a God, otherwise we would end up in despair. Something like that is found in Kant. So, and Nietzsche rejects this putative proof of the existence of God. He thinks that it is presumptuous to assume that there is any necessity for my own preservation. So hence it's ridiculous to believe that God must exist so that my existence gets preserved. But I believe that Nietzsche gets things very wrong here. In many cases, this so-called inference, the so-called proof for the existence of God, is just another expression of hope and desperation, not in the sense of hence God necessarily exists, rather in the sense of let there be a God, hopefully there is a God. As such, this is an expression of the subjective desire to live that we humans have. And since this is the only desire of this kind, there is no life external perspective to condemn such putative inferences or proofs for the existence of God. And for this reason, religion will always exist, will never die. Nietzsche is proving here to be surprisingly unperceptive, or maybe dismissive, of certain phenomena of life. in the name of an idealized life external standard of objectivity, so external indeed that it can be seen as a sort of transcendent focus, an imaginary focus, focus imaginarius. I'm using a phrase from Kant. So an imaginary focus of faith, which Nietzsche so readily dismissed in Christianity and other religions. If Nietzsche rejects Christianity because it makes salvation conditional on certain future beliefs, on transcendent beliefs, which imply the negation of life as we currently know it, then it is no less true for his own ethics. Both Christianity and Nietzsche's ethics propound an ideal unreachable to humans as they are, in their finitude, a transcendent value system which, if realized, would involve a radical change in our nature, a transfiguration of us human beings. Yeah, in other words, there cannot be any properly immanent ethics. We are desperate creatures, always looking in one way or another for some sort of transcendence, even when people come along and claim that no, they are just believing in an immanent ethics. If you look very carefully at their ideals, you will see that they are not ideals which can be fully realized in this existence. All this may make it look as if Nietzsche is merely incapable to escape the transcendent elements which he combats in other systems of ethics. In fact, something more radical can be claimed. Nietzsche himself seeks transcendence, and his ethics is an expression of this aim. Two representative passages may serve to demonstrate this. So this is now the punchline of my lecture. The first was already mentioned, the 1886 fragment, which now I will read out in full. If we say yes to even one moment, we have not only said yes to ourselves, but to all existence. For nothing stands only for itself, neither in ourselves nor in anything. And if our soul has even once, like a string, trembled and resounded with happiness, then all eternities were needed to lead to this single event. And in this single moment of saying yes, all eternity was accepted, redeemed, justified, and affirmed. Amazing passage. Is the pathos of this passage, this incantation of salvation in the moment, substantially that different from the religious pathos of religious thinkers? Plotinus, for instance, the young Luther, or Meister Eckhart, a medieval mystic? Is it less diaphanous, diffuse, frenetic, ecstatic, mystical, irrational than the most devout writings of the religious tradition? Is it less fideistic? Assuming we say yes to a single moment, why would it follow from that we have embraced all being, all eternities, beyond that very moment? What exactly is this yes saying Nietzsche is talking about? It is seemingly saddled with an enormous weight, unlike any ordinary speech act or mental act. What explains its power, if anything? Certainly not the mere fact that it is, together with all prior acts, part of the temporal sequence of my life and of humanity. Humans experience occasionally ecstatic moments of happiness, but they also lapse back into their mundane lives. Their dull moments could equally well be seen as undoing or cancelling out the affirmation delivered by the yes ecstatic moments. For a dull moment tells me that life is dull, just as an ecstatic moment tells me that life is glorious. Of course, this is not how Nietzsche wants to see it. Those ecstatic moments reveal something essential about life, indeed transform life, redeem it. But how? The second passage that I will quote to you, that's a poem, is taken from his Dionysian dithyrambs, written in 1888 but published after he had become insane. In one poem called Glory and Eternity, Nietzsche repeats the pathos of eternity. However, more intriguing, I believe, is the poem, the tripartite poem called The Sun is Setting, a poem about a stormy life coming to an end. Day of my life. The sun is setting. We are headed towards evening. The hardship of the end of decrepitude is not denied here. Your eye already glows, half broken, already there springs up your dew's tear trickle. But death nevertheless appears to announce its own serenity. Serenity, golden one, come, you, death's most intimate, sweetest foretaste. How so, we may wonder? What is there to taste and enjoy about death? For those who die, the process of dying is often cruel and painful, and for those who are dead, there is nothing to taste at all. The answer is, of course, that the only thing enjoyable is here the picture of death, as aesthetically transfigured in life by the poet and his charitable reader. Nietzsche concludes his poem in the following way. Seventh loneliness, never did I feel closer to sweet safety, warmer under the gaze of the sun. Does not the eyes of my peaks still glow? Silvery, light, a fish swims out my bark now. This is pure mythology, the consolation of the living with beautiful words. We are being suggested here a blissful imaginary focus, as I've mentioned already, beyond our reality, beyond our lives. Death is presented here as the culmination of a serene, safe stage of the soul. The final line, swims out my bark now, is particularly intriguing. It intimates that there is something out there, something infinite and redeeming. But of course, in the atheistic framework, this is a lie. The boat will simply sail into the ocean with a decomposing corpse on board. Nietzsche doesn't tell us that. He avoids saying it. His poetic words conjure up a fiction pleasant to our ears, the living ones, those alive, but falsifying reality. Indeed, pleasant and rewarding because falsifying reality. In his deepest unwillingness to rest content with this world in all its brutality lies Nietzsche's deepest similarity with Christianity as he portrays it. Thanks.